He needed a farmhand. What he got was a girl with no shoes and a story that would set the whole Wyoming territory on fire. The wind had been screaming for 3 days straight when she knocked. It wasn't a real knock, more like a scratching, something a stray dog might do. Randy Rowe was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a handkerchief his dead wife had embroidered, trying to remember the sound of her voice. He was 32, but the war and the grief had carved 50 years into his face. His ranch was the only thing he had left, a wide, empty patch of dirt and sorrow that stretched as far as the silence in his own heart. He'd posted the note in town a week ago. Farmhand needed, room and food provided. He hadn't expected anyone. Nobody came to Wyoming to work. They came to die or to get rich and leave. But the scratching came again, and when he pulled the heavy barn door open, the wind tried to rip it from his hands. And there she stood, a ghost made of snow and desperation. Her coat was a rag, her hair was plastered to her skull, and her feet were wrapped in burlap, already turning a dark, angry red from the frost. She looked him dead in the eye, and for a girl who looked like she was about to fall over, her gaze was as steady as a mountain. "I saw your note," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "My name's Denise. I can muck stalls. I don't steal." Randy just stared. He saw the girl he'd passed in town a few days back, the one sitting on the bakery stoop with nothing in her eyes. Now, there was something, a flicker of defiance, a last burning ember in a house full of ash. The snow swirled around her, a white vortex trying to pull her back into the storm. He should have said no. He should have closed the door. Every instinct a man learns from loss told him to turn away. "Come inside," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "before your feet freeze solid." And just like that, the silence he'd lived with for 4 years was broken. He didn't know it yet, but the moment she stepped across that threshold, she wasn't just coming in from the cold. She was walking into a war, and she was bringing it right to his door. The barn was cold, but it was dry. He gave her a pile of hay and a horse blanket, and that was that. He expected her to be gone by morning, a phantom who'd taken a bowl of stew and vanished with the first light. But when he stepped out onto the porch the next day, the sun a pale coin in a steel-gray sky, she was already working. Hauling water from the pump, her thin arms shaking from the strain, her face raw from the wind. "You don't need to do that," he said. She didn't stop. "I said I work," she shot back, not looking at him. "I keep my bargains." Randy didn't argue. He watched her for a moment, the way she moved. Quiet, efficient, like a shadow that knew its place. She never went in the house. She never asked for anything. She just worked. By dawn, the stalls were clean, the harnesses were polished, the water troughs were free of ice. She did the work of 2 men, and she did it without a single complaint. But there was something else about her, something that pricked at the edges of his solitude. He noticed the saddle on his black gelding, the one with the busted stitching he'd been meaning to fix for a month. One morning, it was repaired. The thread was dark and even, pulled tight with a skill he hadn't seen in years. He looked at the hem of her worn dress and saw where a strip of fabric was missing. She was fixing his world with pieces of her own. He started watching her, not just to see if the work was done, but to understand the mystery of her. He saw how she'd pause before opening a door, like she expected a blow to come from the other side. He saw how she'd flinch if he moved too quickly. And he saw the way she pet his old dog, her hands gentle, her voice a soft murmur, when she thought no one was looking. There was a kindness in her buried under layers of fear. One afternoon, he found her barefoot in the snow again, breaking ice from a bucket. "You trying to lose your toes?" he barked, his voice harsher than he intended. She just shrugged, not even looking up. "Never had shoes that fit. I move better without." That night, the temperature dropped. The wind howled like a hungry wolf. He sat in his kitchen, the silence pressing in, and thought of her out there in the barn, curled in the hay. He thought of her mending his coat with a piece of her own dress. He thought of her bare feet in the snow. He got up, walked to the small, cold storeroom off the kitchen, and lit the cast-iron stove. He pulled a thick wool blanket from a trunk and folded it on a chair. When she came in to refill the wood bin, her shoulders hunched against the cold, he just nodded toward the room. "Sleep here tonight," he said. "Barn's too cold." She stopped dead. Her eyes flickered from him to the glowing stove, to the blanket. He saw a shimmer in them, a storm of emotions she refused to let fall. She didn't say thank you. She just gave a single, sharp nod. He turned and walked away. But as he lay in his own bed that night, listening to the faint crackle of the fire through the wall, he knew this was no longer about a farmhand. This was something else entirely, and it was already too late to turn back. The storeroom was tiny, smelling of cedar and old memories, but for Denise, it was a kingdom. It had a door, a real door that locked from the inside. She ran her hand over the simple iron latch, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she slept without one eye open. She slept without a knife clutched in her hand. The days began to settle into a new rhythm. The silence between them was still there, but it changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with unspoken things, with the quiet sounds of two people learning to share a space without sharing their pasts. He decided to teach her to ride. The first time he put her on his gentlest mare, she was stiff as a board, her knuckles white on the pommel. The horse took one step and she slid right off, landing in a heap in the hay. Randy turned, expecting tears or frustration. Instead, he heard a laugh. It was a sound so unexpected, so bright and clear, it startled them both. She was on her back in the straw, giggling, a real, unguarded laugh that made her look younger than he'd thought. He couldn't help it. A dry chuckle escaped his own throat, a rusty sound from a well that had long run dry. "Reckon I'm no rider?" she said, grinning up at him. They tried again. And again. By the end of the week, she was circling the corral on her own, her back straight, a look of fierce pride in her eyes. It was more than riding a horse. It was a piece of freedom, a taste of control in a life that had clearly offered her none. One evening, she quietly asked if she could try baking. "Ain't had a decent biscuit in years," was all he said. The kitchen filled with the smell of cornmeal and hot lard. The biscuits came out lopsided and a little burnt on the bottom. He took one, bit into it, and the tough, lonely man who hadn't felt anything in 4 years felt something shift inside his chest. He reached for another. "Well?" she asked, her voice small. "Better'n anything I've cooked," he grunted, and he watched her smile, a real smile that stayed for the rest of the night. But the piece was fragile, a piece of glass waiting for the one stone that would shatter it. The night the sky cracked open, it came. A blizzard rolled in from the north without warning, a wall of white that swallowed the world. The barn door slammed against its frame so hard it woke them both. Randy grabbed his coat, but Denise was already outside, fighting her way through the wind toward the barn. His prize mare, the last gift from his wife, had gone into labor early. He found them in the stall, the mare groaning, her eyes wide with panic. The foal was stuck, a twisted knot of legs and life going wrong. "She's breathing wrong," Denise yelled over the wind. "She's straining too hard." "Let me," he started, reaching for the mare. "No!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the storm. "I can do it. Just hold the lantern." He held the light, his own hands shaking. He watched as this barefoot girl, this slip of a thing, plunged her bare arms into the mare, her face a mask of concentration. She whispered to the horse, a low, steady stream of words in a language he didn't recognize. It wasn't English, it wasn't Spanish, it was something else, something ancient and calming. With a final desperate push from the mare and a heave from Denise, the foal slid free, slick and shivering. Denise caught it, wrapped it in a clean scrap of cloth, and cradled it to her chest, wiping it clean. The mare nickered, nudging her weak head against Denise's shoulder. Denise closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the horse's flank, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Randy just stood there, holding the light, watching her. Where did a girl with no shoes and a tattered coat learn to birth a foal in the middle of a blizzard? Who was she? The question hung in the cold air, unanswered. The next morning, the world was a clean white slate. When Denise opened her storeroom door, she almost fell. Sitting on the floor, right outside her room, was a pair of boots. They weren't store-bought. They were handmade, stitched from thick, oiled hide. The seams were perfect. The soles were lined with soft wool. They were small. They were made for her. She stared at them, her breath catching in her throat. She knelt slowly, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the leather. No one had ever given her a gift. Food was a payment. A roof was a bargain. But this was something else. This was care. This was protection. She didn't try them on. She picked them up, holding them to her chest like a prayer, and carried them back into her room. She placed them under her cot, a silent promise in a silent house. But the peace of the morning was a lie. The blizzard had brought more than just a new life into the barn. It had shaken something loose inside her, a memory that had been buried under the snow of her past. That night, Randy woke to a sound that chilled him to the bone. It was a cry. A muffled, wounded sound, like an animal caught in a trap. He grabbed the lantern and crept down the hall. The sound was coming from her room. He pushed the door open gently. She was on the floor, curled into a tight ball, her arms wrapped around her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Her blanket was thrown across the room. As she shifted, the lamplight fell across her back, and he saw it. A scar, a hideous jagged line of raised tissue running from her left shoulder blade down to the small of her back. It was old, but the story it told was fresh and brutal. It looked like it had been carved into her with a hot iron. "Denise?" he whispered. She jerked her head up, her eyes wide with a terror that wasn't from the dream. It was from him seeing. "I'm fine," she choked out, trying to pull her shirt closed. He didn't move. He just stood there in the doorway, the lantern held high, the terrible truth of her life illuminated in its yellow glow. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. And the dam broke. The words came tumbling out, a story she had carried alone for so long it had nearly crushed her. "My mother was Apache," she began, her voice flat, dead. "My father was a Mexican railroad worker. They were caught. They hanged my father for stealing a horse he never touched. They sent my mother south. I never saw her again." She stared at the wall, not at him. "I was sold to a rancher in Utah, a man named Silas. He said I could cook and clean for my keep." She paused, took a shuddering breath. "I was 12. Randy's jaw clenched so hard he felt a tooth grind. "He whipped me for dropping a plate. That scar—" She nodded toward her back. "That was the second time, for looking him in the eye. He said property doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have eyes." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There was a fire, in the main house. I played dead, rolled under the floorboards and let the smoke blacken my face. They thought I burned with the others." "Others?" Randy asked, his stomach twisting. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were a frozen hell. "There were other girls. My name isn't Denise. Denise was the girl in the stall next to mine. She didn't make it out of the fire." The silence in the room was deafening. He finally understood. The flinching, the fear of closed doors, the way she worked like her life depended on it, because for so long, it had. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a survivor of something monstrous. He stepped back, closing the door without another word. She probably thought he was disgusted, that he was leaving her to her ghosts. She was wrong. The next morning, he didn't go to the barn. He went to the old shed, the one he hadn't opened since his wife died. Under a dusty tarp was a stack of thick oak planks. Wood he'd cut and sanded himself 4 years ago. Wood he was going to use to build a cradle. He worked all day. The sound of his saw and hammer echoed across the ranch. He didn't stop to eat. He didn't stop to rest. He poured all the rage, all the grief, all the protective fury he felt into the wood. By sunset, it was done. He carried it into her room. It wasn't a cot. It wasn't a pile of hay. It was a bed. A heavy, solid oak bed frame, sanded smooth, built to last 100 years. A fortress against the nightmares. She stood in the doorway, staring at it, her face streaked with tears she wasn't bothering to wipe away. "It won't break," he said, his voice thick. "Not ever." She took a step forward, then another, and reached out her hand. He took it, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. It wasn't a gesture of romance. It was a promise. An anchor. His grip tightened, firm and steady. "You don't have to run anymore. You are home." But home was about to become a battlefield. The snow began to melt, and with the thaw came the poison of small-town gossip. It started with whispers. Glances in the general store that lasted a second too long. Women who used to nod at Randy now turned their backs. The feed store clerk muttered "shame" under his breath as he slammed a sack of oats on the counter. They called her his half-breed, his Apache squaw. They looked at Randy with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a broken man, they said, who'd brought a stray dog into his house and was treating it like a person. Denise felt it, even though she never went to town. She grew quieter, her shoulders hunching in again, the old fear creeping back into her eyes. The laughter he'd coaxed out of her in the corral disappeared. Randy ignored it. Let them talk. Their words were wind. He had faced cannon fire. He could face their judgment. Then, one afternoon, the wind took on a voice. And a name. A rider approached the ranch. Not a neighbor. Not the deputy. This man was different. He moved with a lazy arrogance, his long coat dusty, his hat pulled low. He dismounted and leaned against the water trough like he owned it. Randy was mending a fence nearby and straightened up, his hand resting on his hammer. "Well now," the man drawled, a smirk twisting his lips. "Heard old Silas was looking for some lost property." Randy's blood ran cold. Silas. "I remember this little thing," the man continued, his eyes scanning the ranch house. "Quiet one, but tough. Took a beating better than most." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "She ran off during that fire. Silas wants her back. Got papers and everything. Property is property, Ro, and he pays well for its return." "She ain't for sale," Randy said, his voice dangerously low. The man chuckled. "That ain't your choice to make." And that's when Randy moved. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just reacted. 1 second he was by the fence, the next his fist was connecting with the man's jaw. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man staggered back, blood pouring from his nose, his eyes wide with shock. He crumpled to his knees. Randy stood over him, his whole body trembling with a rage he hadn't felt since the war. "She belongs here," he snarled. "And if I ever see you, or anyone else from that hellhole, on my land again, I will bury you where you stand." The man scrambled away like a kick dog, half falling onto his horse and riding off in a panic. The silence he left behind was heavy, ominous. Randy knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. 2 days later, the town deputy rode up. "Randy," he said, not meeting his eye. "That man you hit, he's pressing charges. Assault." The deputy sighed, shifting his weight. "And there's talk. About the girl. Folks are saying she's a runaway. No papers, no name. Legally, she doesn't exist, which means she can't be protected. She's under my roof, Randy said. That's all the protection she needs. The deputy looked uneasy. That's not how the law sees it. This Silas, he's a powerful man. He's got friends. It might be best for everyone if she just moved on. She's not going anywhere, Randy said, his voice flat, final. That night he sat across from Denise at the kitchen table. The new bed was in her room, the boots were under it, but the fear was back on her face. I reckon there might be trouble, he said quietly. She looked at him, her eyes old and weary. There always was, she whispered. You just didn't see it until now. And she was right. The trouble had been following her for years. Now it had found her. It had found them both. And it was standing right at their gate. The frost came back that week, a bitter early freeze that killed the new buds on the trees. It was like the world was mirroring the chill that had settled over the ranch. Denise stopped humming in the kitchen. She stopped talking to the horses. She just worked, a silent, efficient machine running on fear. Randy saw the signs. He'd seen them in soldiers before a charge, a stillness, a resignation, the look of someone preparing for the end. One morning, he came into the kitchen and she was standing by the door. Not sitting. Standing. She was holding the tattered coat she'd arrived in. I have to leave, she said, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it. He set his coffee cup down, slowly. No, you don't. Yes. Her eyes were dry, but they were swimming in unshed tears. They'll use me to take this place from you. That man, Silas, he doesn't lose. He'll ruin you. I won't be the reason. You are not the reason for anything wrong here, Randy said, his voice tight. You don't get to decide that, she snapped, a flash of her old fire returning. I walked into your life and brought a storm with me. I can't let it tear down the only good thing I've ever known. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floorboards. So you'll just walk out there again? Barefoot and alone? You think I sleep better at night not knowing if you're dead in a ditch somewhere? Is that what you think? I'd rather be dead in a ditch than be the ghost that haunts you, she whispered. And the words struck him like a physical blow. The silence that followed was absolute. He couldn't force her to stay. He couldn't lock her in. The only thing he had ever offered her was a choice, a safe place. And now she was choosing to leave it. He walked past her to the old trunk by the door. He opened it and pulled out a worn leather saddlebag. He filled it with a loaf of bread, dried meat, and a small pouch of coins. Everything he could spare. Then he reached into his own coat, into the pocket over his heart, and pulled out the folded handkerchief. White linen, embroidered with faded blue forget-me-nots. His wife's last gift. He tucked it into the bag and held it out to her. She stared at it, her whole body trembling. Her hand came up, slow, hesitant, and her fingers brushed against the leather. A single tear broke free and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Then another. She took the bag, turned, and walked out the door without looking back. Randy stood there, watching her walk away until she was just a small, dark speck against the vast, white landscape. Then she was gone. That night, the house was colder than it had ever been. The silence was back, but it was different now. It was a hungry, angry silence, filled with the ghost of her laughter, the echo of her footsteps. The snow started to fall again, thick and heavy. He pulled on his boots and walked out to the barn. He stood in the open doorway, staring out at the empty road, leaning against the post where he had first seen her mend his saddle. He stayed there all night. When the pale, uncertain sun finally rose, it illuminated an empty world. The bed he had built for her was untouched. The fire in her stove was dead. But there, on the floor just inside her door, where she had left them, sat the boots. They were still warm. As if she hoped, even as she walked away, that someday she might have a reason to come back and wear them. The winter that followed was a descent into hell. The ranch, once a place of quiet healing, became a monument to his despair. The fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, the horses grew thin. Randy moved through the days like a ghost, fueled by cheap whiskey and a rage that had no target. He told himself it was for the best. She was safe. Silas wouldn't find her if she kept moving. But every night, he'd wake up from dreams of her, barefoot in the snow, and the silence in the house would scream her name. He almost lost the ranch. The bank sent a man out to look at the place, a man with cold eyes and a ledger book. Randy just stared at him, not caring one way or the other. Let it all burn. It was just wood and dirt. The heart of the place had already gone. Then, one afternoon, when the sky was the color of a fresh bruise and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe, he heard it. A scratching at the door. He froze. It couldn't be. He was drunk. He was dreaming. But it came again. Faint. Desperate. He stumbled across the room, his heart hammering against his ribs, and tore the door open. It was her. She looked like she had walked through 1,000 miles of winter. Her hair was matted, her lips were cracked and blue, and her hands were raw. She was wearing the same tattered coat, and on her feet the same rags and twine. She had come back just as she had arrived, with nothing. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "I tried," she whispered, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "I got work, a kitchen. But every night I looked at the floor and wished it was this one. I tried to forget, but I couldn't." She looked up at him, her eyes a raw plea. No one ever called me by my real name, the one I told you, not until you." She took a staggering step forward and collapsed. He caught her, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She felt like a bird with a broken wing. He didn't take her to the house. He took her to the barn, to the place that had first been hers. He laid her in the clean hay, wrapped her frozen feet in blankets, and stoked the small stove in the tack room until it glowed red. When the shaking finally stopped, she looked at him. "I didn't want to bring pain to your door," she said, her voice thick with shame. "But walking away from you was the worst kind of pain I have ever known." He knelt beside her. He took her chapped hands in his, and then he did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of recognition, of coming home. "But it's not over," she whispered, a new hard light in her eyes. "Silas, he's not just cruel. He's a monster, and I'm not the only one who got away." Randy looked at her and saw that the girl who had left in despair had not come back alone. She had come back with a weapon, hope, and a plan. "When I left," she said, her voice gaining strength as the warmth returned to her limbs, "I didn't just run. I went looking for ghosts." She told him about the kitchen she'd worked in, how she'd listened to the talk of drifters and ranch hands, piecing together rumors about Silas's ranch. Rumors of other fires, other girls who had simply vanished. "There was a stable hand," she said, her eyes fixed on something far away. "An old man named Jeb. He saw everything. He kept a record, a ledger, names, dates, the prices Silas was paid." "Paid for what?" Randy asked, his voice a low growl. Denise looked him straight in the eye. "For girls. He wasn't just a rancher. He was a trafficker, selling them to mining camps, to men with money and no morals. The fire I escaped from. He said it, to cover his tracks, to erase the evidence." The pieces clicked into place. The brand, the way he called her property. It was worse than he could have ever imagined. "Jeb got out," she continued. "He's old, hiding out in a mining town 2 counties north. He has the ledger. That's why Silas is so desperate to find me. He thinks I know where it is. He thinks I took it." Randy stood up and began to pace the length of the barn. The despair that had crippled him for months was burning away, replaced by a cold, clear fury. This wasn't just about saving Denise anymore. This was about justice. For her, for the girl whose name she carried, for all the others. "He won't stop," Denise said. "He'll come here. He'll burn this place to the ground to find me." "Let him come," Randy said, stopping in front of her. He reached down and pulled her to her feet. "This time, we won't be hiding." For the first time in years, Randy Rowe rode into town, not for supplies, but for a fight. Denise was beside him, riding the black gelding, her back straight. She wasn't wearing the boots yet. She said she wouldn't, not until she was truly free. They didn't go to the deputy. They went to the telegraph office. Randy sent 2 messages, one to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne, detailing everything Denise had told him. The second was to Jeb, the old stable hand, with a simple message. "The girl from the fire is alive. It's time." Then they waited. The town watched them, the air thick with suspicion and hostility. Silas had done his work well, painting Randy as a crazed hermit and Denise as a dangerous vagrant. But Randy and Denise didn't hide. They worked the ranch side by side, a silent, defiant team. A week later, Silas arrived. He didn't come with thugs. He came with the law. The local sheriff and 2 deputies rode up to the ranch, an official-looking document in the sheriff's hand. "Randy Rowe," the sheriff declared, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for harboring a fugitive and assault, and I have a warrant here to reclaim the property of Mr. Silas." Silas sat on his fine horse, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. He was a handsome man, silver-haired and well-dressed, the very picture of a gentleman, a devil in fine clothes. His eyes locked on Denise, and his smile widened. "It's been a long time, girl," he said, his voice like silk and poison. "Time to come home." Denise flinched, but she didn't look away. Randy stepped in front of her. "She's my wife," Randy said, his voice ringing out across the yard. The sheriff laughed. "A piece of paper won't save you, Rowe. Now step aside." "I don't think so," a new voice said. From around the side of the barn, a figure emerged. An old man, bent and weathered, but with eyes that burned with a fire of their own. It was Jeb. And in his hands, he held a thick, leather-bound ledger. "This here book tells a different story, Sheriff," Jeb said, his voice raspy but strong. "A story about brands, and fires, and girls who disappeared in the night. It's all in here. Every last sin." Silas's smile vanished. His face went pale. "That's a lie. He's a senile old fool." "Is he?" Another rider appeared, coming up the main road, tall and broad-shouldered, with a silver star pinned to his chest. The U.S. Marshal. The local sheriff's face fell. He looked from the marshal to the ledger, to Silas's panicked expression. He knew the game was up. The marshal dismounted, his eyes hard as iron. He took the ledger from Jeb and flipped through a few pages. "Silas," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you're under arrest, for kidnapping, for slavery, and for murder." Silas went for his gun. He never cleared the holster. Randy's fist, the same one that had shattered his henchman's jaw, slammed into his face. Silas went down hard. The marshal's men moved in, clapping irons on him and the complicit local sheriff. It was over. As they dragged Silas away, his eyes, full of hate, found Denise. He spat on the ground. "You're still nothing but property!" he screamed. Denise walked right up to him. The barefoot girl who had arrived in a storm now stood tall before the monster who had haunted her life. "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady for the entire world to hear, "is not Denise. It is Annaba. It means she returns from war." She turned her back on him and walked toward Randy. She stopped at the porch, where the boots he had made for her sat waiting. She sat down, untied the rags from her feet for the last time, and slid her feet into the warm, wool-lined leather. They fit perfectly. They didn't have a church wedding. They didn't need one. Their church was the field of wildflowers behind the house, the same field Randy had once cleared in his grief. He wore his old, mended coat. She wore a simple white dress and the boots he had made for her. He held out his hand. "I ain't got a ring," he said. She took his hand. "I never needed one," she replied. There, under the vast Wyoming sky, with the mountains as their witness, a man who had lost everything and a woman who had started with nothing made a promise. Not with words, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of two souls who had walked through fire and found each other in the ashes. They had built a home, not of wood and nails, but of courage and a love that was as wild and stubborn as the land itself. The story of Randy Rowe and the Barefoot girl became a legend in that part of the country. A story about how sometimes the most broken things can be put back together to create something stronger than before. A testament to the fact that even in the harshest winter, love can find a way to bloom. If this story of grit, survival, and unlikely love grabbed you by the heart, if you believe that even in the darkest of times, there's a light worth fighting for, then your journey with us is just beginning. There are countless stories buried in the dust of the Old West, tales of lone cowboys and brave women who defied the odds. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and join our posse. We'll be sharing more unforgettable stories of love and justice from the untamed frontier. Because out here, the greatest legends aren't about gunfights at high noon. They're about the hearts that refuse to break.